Hi, Karen Wyngaard here. I'm here to introduce you to the photo Dropbox project that we released at the 2017 retreat this year. So this is a cute little box that stores mini albums inside. Each mini album holds 24 pictures, so the box itself will hold up to 72 photos inside. And this is my example here. I did add the little feet. Each box comes with the text weight paper and everything you need to build it, and then you can embellish it further. So let's get started. In your kit you should have a number of mat board or bookboard pieces. There's several different sizes, but let's start by taking out the spine pieces. These are the long narrow pieces of bookboard that you can tell are the spines, so we'll set those aside. Next, stack each of the remaining pieces in order of size. You can see I'm kind of sorting these here. I want to sort them by size from smallest to largest. Take a pencil and we're going to label each of these so that we can identify them later on. So the smallest pieces are called short wall supports. So just use a pencil to write that onto each piece, those two smallest pieces. Okay. Next, the next size are going to be the short walls. Okay, the next piece is a one of a kind. You can see that there are three remaining pieces. This is the narrower piece. This is the base. And the final two matching pieces are long walls. Okay, once all your pieces are labeled, we're going to start the painting process. So grab your three spines, and you're going to gather black acrylic paint and a foam brush. You won't be using a lot of paint, so just add maybe like a nickel-sized dollop to your plate or palette. And it's going to be easiest if you stack these spine pieces together so they're edge to edge. This makes painting the edges quick and easy. So at this point, we only add paint to the four outside edges of the bookboard. And you don't have to get fancy, you just need to make sure that you've got that covered on all four sides. Once you've got those painted, you can set those aside. Next, grab your short wall supports. On this particular piece, all you're going to do is paint one short edge. You can see here I've got the long edge and short edge. So stack those together and you only have to add paint to one short edge. Set that aside. And then you're going to do the same thing with the short wall. So I'm just doing one short edge of the short walls. But then on each of those, I'm going to do one swipe of paint just across the top. It's about 1/4 of an inch on there. So one short edge will have only paint on the top edge of the bookboard and about 1/4 of an inch reveal on the front of it. Finally, locate your long walls. And this time, instead of doing a short edge, you're going to paint one long edge of the long wall pieces. So stack those two together and add paint just to one long edge of the long walls. And that's all the painting. Once your paint is dry, it's time to prepare the spine pieces. On the landing page of the retreat documents, you'll find that there is a piercing template available that's printable for the photo Dropbox. You can see here I've removed the spine template from that document. You just trim that out. At this point, I'm just going to add a little tiny bit of adhesive on the reverse side of that template so that I can temporarily adhere it to the spine. So we'll just work with one spine at a time here. Once your template is in place and all of the outside edges are aligned, we will pierce holes everywhere you see one of these black dots, including the center. So make sure that you're piercing through the bookboard into a piece of cork with an awl. Now, if you have a little trouble and you need a little extra muscle, you can grab a craft hammer and then tap that on top to make sure that you're getting a hole all the way through that bookboard. This process will take a little while and it will take a little bit of elbow grease. So go ahead and do that with one spine, making sure that you're marking that center hole as well. Once you've pierced through all the holes, you can go ahead and remove that template, and you'll see that all of the holes have been transferred to the bookboard piece. At this point, it'll actually help you out if you take a little extra time to really ream each of those holes. These are our stitching holes for when we assemble the booklets that hang inside the photo drop box, so this extra step will be well worth it in the end. Once you've reamed all of your holes really well, you can go ahead and repeat the steps with the other two spine pieces. Just apply that template and pierce through all the holes. Once you have all of the holes pierced in all three spines, use a crocodile tool to punch that center hole. We need this to be an 1/8 inch hole in the center of each bookboard spine. So make sure that you've got all your holes pierced, fully reamed, and then your 1/8 inch hole punched into each of the three spines. Next, it'll be time to laminate the spine pieces. You want to find one of your 12 by 12 prints from your kit, and we're going to flip that over so that the plain white side is showing. At this point, you're going to take bookbinding glue, and you want to spread it on the non-lumpy side. Do you see how one side has the bumps? You want to spread the glue on the non-lumpy side of each spine piece. So we're going to do these one at a time. Make sure you have full coverage, and then place the spine piece into one of the corners of the 12 by 12 print so that the edge of the painted edge aligns with the edge of the paper. Take your second spine and place it in another corner. Again, making sure that you're lining one of the long edges, one of the long painted edges of the spine, so that it aligns with the edge of the 12 by 12 paper. And repeat with the third spine. Again, the glue goes on the non-lumpy side, and place it into a corner so that it aligns with the edges of the paper. Hard to see the white on white here, so just make sure that you're as close to the edge as you can get. Next, go to your bookboard pieces and locate your base piece. Now, I recommend gluing on the non-written side. You've written the word base on one side, so take and spread glue on the non-labeled side of your bookboard base. And this will be placed in that fourth corner. Again, making sure that the edges of the bookboard, this time they're not painted, remember, so the edges of the bookboard are aligned with the edge of the paper. And then just flip that over and make sure that you're burnishing the glue and the paper so that it laminates well. Once you've burnished, you'll set this piece aside and grab the second 12 by 12 print. So your second 12 by 12 print, we're going to repeat the same thing. We're just going to flip this over so that we're gluing onto the plain side. At this point, we're going to locate the long walls. So find your long walls, and on the non-labeled side, spread the glue And because the long wall has a painted edge, we want to make sure and align that painted edge with one of the edges of the 12 by 12. And burnishing that down so it adheres well to the paper, double checking that you're flush with the edges. You can see my painted edge aligns here. Repeat with the second long wall, again remembering to put the glue on the non-labeled side. Just gonna rotate this and align the painted edge with the edge of the paper. Next, out of your bookboard stack, locate the short wall supports. These are the ones that have just the painted edge, not the extra paint on the front. So the short wall supports, just like the long walls, we're going to glue these to the 12 by 12 print so that the painted edge aligns with one of the edges of the paper. And again, I'm gluing on the non-labeled side. Once all 4 pieces are glued to the paper, just make sure you flip it over and burnish with your fingers or a bone folding tool to get good adhesion. Once you've set aside that second piece to dry, by this time your spine pieces should be dry, that piece that we've laminated that to. So grab your craft knife and cutting mat, and at this point we're going to trim out the spine pieces and that base piece from the 12 by 12 print. So just use your craft knife along the edge of each of those pieces to remove them from the 12 by 12 print. And when I'm using a craft knife, I always try to rotate the project so that I am pulling toward myself, so that I get a nice clean cut. Making sure you have a nice sharp blade is important as well. So by this time, I've removed all 3 spine pieces and the base piece from the 12 by 12 print. Now you can see on this side we've covered up those piercing holes. So at this point you want to grab your cork and your awl and re-pierce each of those holes into the spine. So starting from the lumpy side where you can actually see where the holes are, just place the awl inside each hole to mark where those holes are located, and then you can come in from the print paper side and do a little twist so that you're making sure to re-ream those holes so that they're nice and big for the stitching later. Go ahead and repeat that with all 3 spine pieces, transferring those holes from the back to the front so that you now have pierced holes in the spine. One tip you might find helpful during this process is to place all 3 spines in a row so that you can pierce all the way across each row. It gets to be where you can't really remember where you pierced and where you didn't because the holes are already there. So this may help you in the process of re-piercing all of these holes so that you don't miss one. At this point, don't forget that center hole was a little bit larger than the rest of the pierced holes, so you can just take the tip of a pencil to make sure that that's widened again. Once you've completed that center hole, at this point you should have 3 screws and 3 knobs for your project. Locate the screw, and we're going to place it from the lumpy side or naked side of the bookboard through to the front, and then take the knob and screw it right on to the spine. And you want to get that as tight as you can, and repeat that with each of the remaining spine pieces. Once you have all 3 spine pieces complete with the knob, it's time to laminate the back side of the paper. Go back to that print that you just trimmed the spines from, and at this point we're going to flip it over, and this time we're going to glue on the lumpy side right over the top of that screw. What's cool about this is it'll laminate the back side of the spine piece, and it'll cover up all the not so pretty stuff. Here though, with the lumps, it gets a little tricky for the lamination process, so make sure that you're getting the glue full coverage. And again, just locate a straight edge and make sure that you're aligning the painted edge of the spine with the edge of the paper. And do that for all 3 spines. Burnishing these pieces is even more important than it was the first time. So make sure you're getting good contact between the bookboard and the paper. Once you've got all 3 pieces down, just really burnish. I can't stress enough how important that is. And then set that aside. It's time to grab our cutting mat again, and this time we're going to locate the pieces with the long wall and the short wall supports, and use your craft knife and cutting mat to remove those pieces from the 12 by 12 print. Once your spine pieces have had time to dry, we'll continue to use the craft knife and cutting mat to remove these spines from the printed paper. Just be sure to give it plenty of time to dry, otherwise the wet glue with paper can buckle. Once you've got your spine removed, you can go ahead and you're going to have to re-ream those holes one last time. So just grab your cork and your awl and firmly press into it so that you're re-reaming each of those stitching holes, and repeat that for all 3 spines. Once you've finished piercing through all 3 spines, you're going to set those aside to dry. I can't stress the importance though of just clearing out these stitching holes. You really can't overdo making sure that those holes are nice and clear for the stitching later. So once you've done that, go ahead and set those aside to dry. The next step is to build the box. Now what I want to make note of is you have laminated sides on each of these pieces, and you still have the labeled side showing. So starting with the short walls, you want to locate the short wall and the short wall supports. So those should be the 2 smallest pieces. Take your short wall support, and you're going to be gluing this to the short wall so that you're gluing on the side that has the extra paint across the top. And if you take a look, you should see that that can be centered as if it's a picture being matted onto a photo mat. Can you see that I have equal exposure on all 4 sides? It's about 1/8 of an inch. So you're going to do that with both short wall supports, gluing them to the short walls. So just making sure that you're placing the glue on the non-papered or non-laminated side. And before you actually glue it down, just double check that your painted edge is at the same end as the painted edge on the short wall. So place it in the center, position it so that you are in the center of that piece. So it should leave an 1/8 inch border on all 4 sides. Make sure you really burnish that into place, and then repeat that with the second short wall support. Again, placing glue on the non-paper, non-laminated side, and I'm making sure that my painted edge is lining up with the painted edge on the short wall. Center it, and just make sure that you burnish for good contact. Next, find your base, and we're going to place this so that the paper side is sticking up. At this point, as you're assembling your box, it's important to remember everything you see that has paper on it right now is the inside of your box. We'll be wrapping the outer edges later on. So keeping in mind, as you're assembling and gluing these pieces, the paper or laminated side should be facing the center inside of the box. So place your base piece down so that the paper side is facing you, and grab one of those short walls and short wall supports that you just assembled. Now before you add any glue, I want you just to take a look and try to dry fit this. What you'll see is that 1/8 inch border that's exposed, that actually creates a little step here, or a little shelf, if you will, for the short wall to rest so that the short wall support is on top of the edge of the base. So if you take a look at that, you need to decide where the glue will go. So at this point, because it's going to sit up on the shelf, we wouldn't need any glue on the outside edge, but we do need the glue kind of in this stepped area here. So you probably have enough glue in your brush from earlier that you can just get some glue right into that little stepped area and then place the short wall onto the base so that that short wall support is resting upon the base and the rest of the short wall is resting on your work surface. So if you just hold that in place for 10 to 15 seconds, that should have time to set up, and then you'll repeat with the second short wall structure. And again, keeping in mind that the painted surfaces should be facing you, so make sure you're not ever adding glue to where you have black paint. Once both of your short walls have had a chance to set up, you want to locate one of your long walls. Again, making sure that the painted edge is facing the top, and remembering that the laminated or pretty printed side should be facing the center of the project. So if you dry fit this, you should see that there is an open area here where that 1/8 inch long wall, that little, should all just tuck right inside, so that you're actually getting a smooth edge, a flush surface on the outside of the box. Do you see that? At the bottom and on the sides. So your long wall will actually just tuck on top of the base and then into that little 1/8 inch step nook where the short walls are. So if you take a look at this, we need to add glue in 3 places. One on the non-painted edge so that it makes contact with the base, and then about an 1/8 inch bead of glue on the left and right sides where you can see that it will touch the short wall supports inside. Do you see that? So go ahead and add the glue. Again, you probably have plenty in your brush right now. To the non-painted edge, papers facing inside the project, and then I know I'm going to have to glue here and here. So on the outside edge and about an 1/8 inch on top of that inside edge of the paper. So everywhere I'm going to come into contact, I need to have that glue. So again, it's resting on the base and inside that stepped area. So just take and let that set up for 10 to 15 seconds. And I like to just lay it on its side so you can kind of see where everything's supposed to be touching, and just hold it into place. Once you have one long wall all glued in, then go ahead and add that second long wall. Just remembering that the painted edge should be facing up like the other painted edges, and making sure that you're adding the glue to the appropriate places where it'll actually touch the structure of the box. So that's your long edge, the 2 short edges, and then just a little bead on that 1/8 inch edge of both short sides. And then just tuck that right in. You should see that there's just a little home for all that to tuck right into the box. And again, you may find it easier to lay it on its side so that you can see everywhere it's supposed to be sticking, and let that set up for 10 to 15 seconds. So now you can see the inside is all decorated. Now it's time to wrap the outside of the box. Take one of your 6x12 printed pieces and lay it face down onto your work surface. At this point, we're going to spread glue on one long wall, but before you do, just kind of dry fit everything. What I find is if you spread the glue on one long wall, then you're going to place the project down in front of you so that the edge of the paper is lined up with the painted edge of the box, leaving approximately the same amount of space on both sides. So once you've kind of got an idea of what you're doing, go ahead and spread that glue along that whole long wall, just one side. You can see where we labeled it. This isn't even going to show. Covering all that up, and I'm going to wrap it and make it look really nice. So once the glue is spread, set the project down onto that 6x12, making sure that the painted edge aligns with the edge of the paper. I'll kind of try to show you here. And then you have approximately the equal amount of paper exposed on both sides. And then you can just kind of flip that out over and burnish so that you're working out any air bubbles. Okay, once you've gotten that into place, now we need to glue the flaps. You can see that we'll need to spread glue onto the paper, but only to where the edge of the bookboard lands. So it helps if you hold it up off your work surface and just spread glue on that flap, but only where it'll adhere to the box. It's not necessary to go out past that edge there. Once you've done that, you can wrap it around. And here's where you'll want to make sure to make any adjustments along this edge, because you don't want the plain bookboard to show here. So make sure that you're aligning that, making adjustments as necessary, and then just burnish that into place. And you can repeat that step with that second flap. You can see here I'm a little uneven, so this is where you can just make a little bit of an adjustment before the paper sets up so that none of that bookboard is exposed along that edge. So you can see one side of my box is wrapped. Now we'll repeat those steps with that second long wall. So take the second 6x12 print, lay it pretty side to the table, and repeat those steps. We'll spread the glue on the long wall and then place it down onto the 6x12 so that the edge of the painted lip of the box is aligned with the edge of the paper, and then wrap the flaps. So at this point you've got all the outside edges wrapped, so now we have to deal with the bottom. If you recall how you wrap a Christmas gift, you can actually do that with the base of this project. So just take the two short sides and tuck them in and just make a crease at each corner. It's going to make that 45-degree angle for you. Because this is text weight paper, it's very pliable and easy to work with. So just tuck in those two short sides, and then you'll end up with those 45-degree angled corners that will then come down like so. So once you've got the paper trained, you can go ahead and add glue to the two short flaps, and you may have to add a little bit of adhesive where these two pieces overlap. So glue both of the short sides first. You can see that it'll stick up if I don't glue that down, so just add a little adhesive there where they overlap. And then finally we can add adhesive to the two long flaps. You can see you have nice finished corners. Now we still have some of that bookboard exposed, so go into your black cardstock pieces. You should have two pieces that are almost the same size. The rest are all matching pages that we'll work with next. But you want to locate the one that's long and narrow. And then when you have that in, you'll spread glue on that, and that'll cover up all of the seams and everything on the bottom of the box. So go ahead. Once your base paper is adhered, your box is complete, so we can set that aside to dry. The next step will be working with the inside pages of each of the spine mini books that sit inside. You should have 18 sheets of black paper. Each of these pieces of paper will need to be folded in half horizontally. And when folded, they will become 4 1/4 by 6 1/4, which is the perfect size for matting photos. So go ahead and fold and burnish each of those 18 pages. Once all 18 of those sheets are folded in half and burnished, you're going to nest them in sets of 4. Because we like to be efficient, you can actually pierce through up to 4 sheets of the cardstock. So just take these pieces and nest them into 4s. You'll have 4 sets of 4 with 2 left over. Now it's time to locate your stitching cradle. We'll be using the stitching cradle and the awl to pierce holes into our inside pages. Now is your chance to remove the piercing tool or the piercing guide for your inside pages from your PDF printout. grab one set. As we mentioned before, you can nest these into up to 4 pages and still be very accurate. So take one of your sets of 4 pages, place it into the stitching cradle, and it'll actually sit open very nicely. That's what's great about this stitching cradle. And you can see on the guide, there is a top edge of page and a bottom edge of page. Just lay this into your open pages so that that outside line at the top and the bottom align with the top edge of your page and the bottom edge of your page. Kind of self-explanatory. Now the remaining lines here you can see are where you're going to pierce holes into the spine of these inside pages. So just take your awl and press it right into that piercing cradle so that you're piercing into all 4 pages. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 holes that you're piercing through each of these. Go ahead and repeat that for the remaining sets of pages. Now once you have all of your sets of 4 pages done, you'll end up with just that set that has 2 left over. So pierce those holes, and then you can go ahead and set that guide aside. Now we pierced them in sets of 4 in the interest of efficiency. We actually saved ourselves half the time. So at this point, you're going to take each of these and create a signature. So a signature in a book is nested pages. So in this particular project, we're going to nest these into signatures of 2 pages each. So go ahead and sort through the remaining, taking those sets of 4 and dividing them into sets of 2, so that you have a total of 9 2-page signatures. In your kit, you have 1 long length of black waxed linen thread. At this point, go ahead and unroll it, and we need to cut this. It's about 3 yards, so we need to trim this into 3 equal pieces that'll be approximately 1 yard each. So go ahead and do that now. So once you've divided your thread into 3 equal lengths, go ahead and just take 1 length and thread it onto your needle. And you can just leave about a 3-inch tail. Now it's time to stitch the inside pages to the book itself. This is where you want to make sure you have your handy dandy paper clip nearby. So starting from the inside of the booklet or signature, in the top hole of your page, you can see here in the spine we have 3 holes across, which makes 3 columns. So we have our leftmost column, the center, and the right. As we're stitching this book, it's important to remember that we stay in 1 column at a time. So you can see that the holes in my signature correspond with the 6 holes of the spine. So to start stitching the book, again coming in from the inside of the signature to the outside, we want to locate the top hole of the spine piece in that first column of piercings. So go ahead and pull that through, and you want to leave about a 3-inch tail on the inside of the project. At this point, thread your paperclip onto your needle, and that'll just kind of land right up there next to your top hole. Now once your paperclip is in place, it's going to be a place marker for a little loop. So now we're going to take our needle and thread and we're going to stitch right back into the same exact hole that we came out of. And you need to go through the spine and the hole in the top signature so that you end up with your thread. Right now all we're holding is that paper clip in place, and we end up on the inside of our book. Okay? Next, start from the inside of the book to the outside, and we're going to stitch into that second hole. And again, we're staying in that same column, that first leftmost column, and we have our first long stitch on the inside of the book. Stitch down into the third hole. And now we have our first long stitch on the outside of the book. From the inside out, we're going to come through the the fourth hole. Again, we're still staying in that first column on our spine. We don't want to mix those up or cross columns. And just go in and out of the spine until we get to the bottom. So we're going to go from the inside to the outside. This is where the true test of how well you've reamed your holes is. You'll notice if you did a good job or if you made things rougher on yourself. Okay, so now you can see I have the little tiny loop where my paper clip is, and I have 2 long stitches, and I'm coming out of the bottom hole of my spine. Now I'm just going to make the small stitch, or actually I'm going to close up this first signature, and then I'm going to make the small stitch from the first hole in the bottom hole in the first column into the bottom hole of the second column, and this is where you will add a second signature. So get that handy, and you should be coming in the bottom hole of the second column, and that'll go into the bottom hole of your next signature. And just pull that all the way through. So you can see that just makes a small stitch from the first column to the second column. From the inside, you're going to come into the next hole, which should coordinate with the next hole up in that second column. And as you're doing this, just make sure that you don't have slack in your threads wherever you're stitching. And then you'll just go in and out until you get back to the top in the second column next to where you started. Okay, so now you can see that my long stitches are all parallel to each other, and now I'm coming out of the top hole in the second column next to the first column where I started. Now you can see this is where the paper clip is kind of holding a placeholder for my little loop. Do you see the loop that's been created here that's being held by the paper clip? At this point, you want to capture that loop with your needle. So you're going to slide your needle through the loop that was created by the paper clip, remove the paper clip, slide it right off. So now I've got my thread in that loop. Oops, don't let it get caught on the little knob. And you can see I've now created a little stitch. Now at this point you want to just pause and then turn your attention to the inside of that first signature where we started. So you want to locate that tail. Do you remember that 3-inch tail we left on the inside? At this point we want to make a knot on the inside of the book. So you can see hopefully here that I'm sliding the tail of my thread underneath that top long stitch. That creates a loop, and then I'm just going to take the tail of that thread, pull it through the loop, and I want to make the knot as close to the top hole as I can. Now the beauty of the wax linen thread is that it will hold that knot and not slip out because of the waxing on there. So you can just tuck that inside. And just to remember where we are now out of the top edge, or excuse me, the top hole. We've made our kettle stitch. We're going to slide our thread underneath that loop that we made and then pull firmly just to make sure our knot's nice and tight. Now we can add our third signature. So at this point we're going to slide our needle into the top hole of the third column. This is where we want to take another signature and stitch into the top hole in the corresponding hole there of the signature page. You can see I'm making another small stitch here, and then just kind of repeating that in and out process, making sure that I'm not crossing columns. Again, how well you reamed your holes is going to become quite apparent during this stitching process. And then I'm just going to go down that column in and out of the signature until I reach the bottom. And I'm pulling taut with each stitch so that I don't have any slack on the inside of the book. So once you're down at the bottom of that third column, we need to create a kettle stitch down here so that nothing comes undone. So at this point you'll see you have this small stitch here. You're going to place your needle underneath it and pull it through until you create that little loop. Okay, then we're going to pull the needle through the loop and then pull it taut. So once you've got your kettle stitch, you can then enter that bottom hole of the third column where we just came out of, and then stitch to the inside of the book. And then much like the tail we had in the first signature, we're going to slide our needle underneath that closest long stitch, creating a loop, and then put the needle through the loop, and then we're going to end our knot as even as we can with that top hole. At this point, you can snip off the thread, and you have completed your first little set of booklet pages. So you can see that just is going to rest right on that little lip that's created by your box. So once you've finished assembling each of your stitch spines, you should have 3 of them that fit down into your box, and they fit just perfectly. And then these cute little knobs will allow you to pull the pages up and out so that you can flip through, and this holds up to 72 photos total. This is the box that Julie created for her sample, for her project, and you can see she made these beautiful paper flowers. And then that final piece of black cardstock is a photo mat that you can use to place a photo on the outside of your box. So this is Julie's box with retreat photos from several years. Very cool. And then to go back to my box, I just added the little feet. They had kind of a fun touch, and I actually filled this particular sample with photos that my dad takes in our local park. He's a pretty avid amateur photographer, so I actually did the seasons with each of his different photographic spring, winter, and fall, with the beautiful fall colors in our local park. So I hope you enjoyed this project. Thanks so much for joining me.